You have 30 seconds to decide. Do you want to know the 10 real vampire legends that inspired every horror movie you've ever seen? Because once you hear about the Krasue's floating head hunting for blood, you'll never sleep the same. Comment below where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Because what I'm about to share with you, these aren't Hollywood fantasies. These are the nightmares that kept entire civilizations awake, huddled around fires, whispering prayers until dawn. Who was the real Dracula? And why has his shadow lasted for centuries? We've all heard of vampires, but few know the Strigoi. Creatures so terrifying that Romanian mothers still refuse to speak their names after sunset. By the end of this video, you'll see how these ancient terrors connect to the darkness we still fear today. Tonight, we walk through 10 forgotten realms where the dead refuse to stay buried, where floating heads hunt in the darkness of Thai villages, where Caribbean grandmothers shed their skin at midnight, where Chinese corpses hop through moonlit streets, arms outstretched, seeking the warmth they'll never feel again. This isn't just folklore. This is humanity's oldest confession. We've always known that some hungers never die. Chapter 1. Strigoi. In Romanian villages today, if a child is born with a caul over their face, the midwife burns it immediately. Because in the Carpathian Mountains, they know what happens when the membrane between life and death grows thin. The Strigoi don't just drink blood. They steal your very essence until you become them. But why do some corpses refuse to rest? The mist clings to the Carpathian peaks like ancestral guilt, never lifting, never offering reprieve. Here in the shadow of Transylvania's ancient forests, the word vampire carries weight that Hollywood could never capture. Here they whisper, Strigoi, and even the wind seems to pause, listening. Maria Popescu learned the truth on the night her grandmother died. The old woman's eyes had snapped open just as the village clock struck midnight. Pupils dilated black as winter wells. The Strigoi mort, her grandmother gasped, fingers clawing at the bed sheets. They're coming home. Maria had always assumed the stories were metaphor. Folklore meant to teach respect for the dead. She was educated, modern, a teacher who'd returned from Bucharest to care for her aging grandmother in the village of Râmnicu Sărat. But education means nothing when you're standing over a grave that's been clawed open from the inside. The Strigoi are not like the elegant vampires of literature. They are humanity's deepest fear made flesh. That death is not an ending, but a transformation into something hungry, something wrong. Romanian folklore speaks of two types. The Strigoi view, living vampires who possess dark powers, and the Strigoi mort, the walking dead who return to torment the living. But what creates a Strigoi? The answers lie buried in Romania's blood-soaked history, in the collective trauma of a people who've witnessed too much death, too much betrayal. Those born with birth defects, especially a caul, the membrane that sometimes covers a newborn's face, are marked from their first breath. The seventh child of a seventh child carries the curse in their very DNA. Those who die by suicide, murder, or excommunication return with an insatiable hunger that grows stronger with each feeding. The transformation isn't immediate. First comes the restlessness in the grave, the soil shifting, small sounds in the night. Livestock begin dying mysteriously, drained of blood, but with no visible wounds. Family members report nightmares so vivid, they wake with marks on their necks, feeling exhausted despite a full night's sleep. Maria discovered these signs 3 days after her grandmother's funeral. The chickens were found dead in their coop, bodies intact but completely bloodless. The village dogs whined continuously, refusing to pass the cemetery after dark. And Maria herself began experiencing the dreams. In her sleep, she walked through the house where she'd been raised, but the rooms were wrong, too long, with too many shadows. Her grandmother stood at the foot of her bed, but the face was her grandmother's, and yet not. The skin was gray-white, almost translucent, revealing the dark network of veins beneath. The eyes held an intelligence that was both familiar and alien, loving and utterly predatory. "You have my blood," the thing wearing her grandmother's face would whisper. "You've always been mine." The Strigoi possess powers that defy natural law. They can shapeshift into animals. Wolves, dogs, cats, even insects that slip through the smallest cracks. They manipulate weather, summoning storms and fog to mask their movements. Most terrifying of all, they can appear in dreams, feeding on their victims' life force while they sleep, leaving them to waste away slowly, never understanding why they grow weaker each day. Traditional protections seem almost quaint until you're facing the supernatural reality they were designed to combat. Garlic, yes, but also wild roses, hawthorn, and running water. Mirrors placed strategically throughout the house to confuse spirits who cast no reflection. Salt scattered across thresholds because the Strigoi compulsively count small objects and can be delayed until sunrise. But these are defensive measures. When a Strigoi has already risen, more extreme action is required. Maria found herself standing in the village cemetery at 3 a.m., holding a wooden stake carved from ash wood, blessed with holy water and inscribed with protective symbols. Father Dumitrescu stood beside her, his usually steady hands trembling as he clutched his prayer book. The village elder, Constantin Radu, worked silently with a shovel, his weathered face grim with purpose. They had no choice. The dreams were spreading. 3 more villagers had reported the same nocturnal visits, and old Gheorghe Nistor had been found dead in his bed that morning, face frozen in an expression of absolute terror, body drained of blood. The coffin came up easier than it should have. The wood was soft, almost rotten, despite being buried less than a week ago. When they pried open the lid, Maria's breath caught in her throat. Her grandmother's body lay inside, but it was wrong in every conceivable way. The skin had taken on a ruddy, almost healthy flush. The hair had grown longer, darker. The fingernails had extended into yellowed claws, and beneath them was fresh blood and fragments of wood. Evidence of her attempts to claw her way out. But the eyes were the worst. They were open, staring directly at Maria with an expression of such pure malevolence that she nearly dropped the stake. The lips, once thin and pale, were now full and red, curled into a smile that revealed teeth grown sharp and long. "My dear granddaughter," the corpse spoke, its voice a horrible parody of the woman who had raised her. "You've come to join me at last." Constantin didn't hesitate. The stake drove down with a wet, tearing sound that echoed off the cemetery walls. The thing that had been Maria's grandmother shrieked, not with her voice, but with the sound of wind through broken glass, of metal scraping against stone. Blood erupted from the wound, dark and thick, splashing across Maria's hands and face. But this isn't even the strangest part. As the blood touched Maria's skin, she felt it, a rush of memories that weren't her own. She saw her grandmother as a young woman, beautiful and vibrant, dancing at village festivals. She saw the moment of her transformation, the desperate hunger that drove her from the grave. and she saw the others, dozens of them, scattered across Romanian history, an unbroken chain of the undead stretching back centuries. The Strigoi are not random monsters. They are the physical manifestation of unfinished business, of love that becomes possession, of the terrible fear that death might not be the end of suffering. In a land that has known invasion, plague, and betrayal, they represent the ultimate violation, that even death cannot protect us from those who refuse to let go. As Maria watched her grandmother's body crumble to dust, she understood something that chilled her more than the October wind. The dreams hadn't stopped. They had simply changed. Now, in the moments between sleep and waking, she could feel the hunger stirring in her own blood. The Strigoi, you see, are not just predators. They are progenitors. And once their blood touches yours, the transformation has already begun. Wait. What happens when a Strigoi chooses love over hunger? We'll return to this mystery when we reach the Hebrew tales of the Alukah. But first, let's journey to the rainforests of Latin America, where a different kind of blood drinker stalks the night. Chapter 2. Chupacabra. Farmers in Puerto Rico swear that animals can sense the Chupacabra 3 days before it strikes. Since 1995, over 200 livestock deaths have been attributed to this creature across Latin America. But here's what investigators never mention. The animals aren't just drained. They're surgically precise puncture wounds with no blood spilled on the ground. How does something extract every drop without leaving a trace? The morning sun had barely touched the mountains of Canovanas when Madeline Tolentino heard her neighbors screaming. It was March 1995, and the sugarcane fields stretched endlessly under a sky the color of old blood. But this wasn't the cry of someone who had found a dead animal. This was the sound of someone whose reality had just shattered. Madeline ran barefoot across the dew-soaked grass, her heart hammering against her ribs. What she found in Miguel's pasture would change Puerto Rico forever. 18 goats lay scattered across the field like broken dolls, their bodies completely intact, except for 2 small puncture wounds on their necks. But it wasn't the wounds that made her stomach twist. It was the smell. Or rather, the absence of smell. Dead animals stink. They bloat, they leak, they attract flies within hours. These goats looked like they had simply deflated. Their skin hung loose on their frames, gray and papery, as if every drop of moisture had been extracted through those tiny holes. And there wasn't a single drop of blood anywhere. Dios mío, Miguel whispered, crossing himself. What kind of devil does this? The question would haunt Puerto Rico for months. The Spanish colonial history of the island is soaked in blood, conquered peoples, enslaved populations, brutal plantation systems. But the Chupacabra represents something different, something modern, something that challenges our contemporary understanding of the natural world. The first official sighting came 3 weeks later. Madeline herself encountered the creature on a humid evening as she walked home from her job at the local clinic. She was cutting through the abandoned coffee plantation when she heard it. A low, rattling sound, like a snake's warning mixed with the purr of a massive cat. The thing crouched 50 feet away, partially hidden behind a rusted coffee processing machine. In the dying light, Madeleine could make out a vaguely reptilian shape, about the size of a small dog, but standing upright on powerful hind legs. Its skin looked gray-green, almost metallic, with spines running down its back like a prehistoric iguana. But the eyes were what froze her blood. They were large, almost completely black, and filled with an intelligence that was utterly alien. When the creature looked at her, Madeleine felt exposed, as if it were reading her thoughts, cataloging her fears. It made that rattling purr again, and she realized with horror that it was laughing. The Chupacabra tilted its head too far, like an owl, and opened its mouth. Row after row of needle-sharp teeth gleamed in the fading light, and she could see a long, hollow proboscis extending from its throat like a mosquito's feeding tube, magnified 1,000 times. Then it was gone, moving with impossible speed through the underbrush, leaving only the smell of ozone and copper in the air. But this isn't even the strangest part. Within hours of Madeleine's encounter, reports began flooding in from across the island. Farmers in Bayamon found 15 sheep drained dry. A family in Guaynabo discovered their prize-winning rooster hanging from a tree, every drop of blood extracted through 2 microscopic holes. Each attack followed the same pattern: surgical precision, complete exsanguination, no blood spilled. The media dubbed it El Chupacabra, the goat sucker. But as the phenomenon spread beyond Puerto Rico into Mexico, Central America, and even parts of the United States, researchers began to notice disturbing patterns that suggested something far more complex than a simple cryptid. Dr. Carlos Soto, a veterinarian from San Juan, was among the first to examine the carcasses scientifically. What he found defied conventional biology. The blood wasn't just drained, he explained to a gathering of concerned farmers. It was extracted with surgical precision. The puncture wounds showed evidence of some kind of anticoagulant, preventing the blood from clotting. But more disturbing was the condition of the internal organs. The organs had been rearranged, not damaged, not removed, but carefully repositioned as if something had been searching for specific biological components. The liver was always found in the chest cavity. The heart was invariably moved to the lower abdomen. It was as if the Chupacabra possessed an intimate knowledge of mammalian anatomy and was conducting some kind of systematic study. Local folklore began to evolve rapidly, incorporating elements that seemed to bridge ancient Caribbean mysticism with modern anxieties about genetic experimentation and extraterrestrial contact. Some claimed the Chupacabra was the result of secret government experiments, a bioweapon that had escaped from hidden laboratories. Others insisted it was an alien scout, harvesting genetic material from Earth's creatures. But the indigenous Taíno people of Puerto Rico had a different theory. Elder Maria Santos, one of the last speakers of the Taíno language, shared stories that her grandmother had passed down. Tales of the hupia, shadow spirits that could drain the life force from living beings. According to Taíno mythology, the hupia were the souls of those who had died violent deaths, transformed by their rage and pain into something that existed between the physical and spiritual worlds. The colonizers brought death to our people, Maria explained, her weathered hands tracing protective symbols in the air. But death remembers. Death adapts. What you call Chupacabra, we call the return of stolen souls, hungry for the life they were denied. This interpretation takes on chilling significance when you consider the locations of Chupacabra attacks. Archaeological surveys reveal that nearly 80% of the encounters have occurred near sites of historical trauma, former plantations, mass burial grounds, locations where indigenous populations were massacred or enslaved, peoples were tortured. Miguel's farm, where the first attacks occurred, sits directly on top of what was once a Spanish torture facility known as Casa del Dolor, the House of Pain. records from the colonial period describe horrific experiments conducted on enslaved Africans and captured Taino rebels, including systematic bloodletting designed to determine how much blood loss a human could survive. The connection between historical trauma and contemporary supernatural phenomena is not unique to Puerto Rico. Across Latin America, similar blood-draining entities appear in the folklore of oppressed peoples. In Mexico, the Chupacabra shares characteristics with the ancient Aztec legend of the Tzitzimime, star demons that devoured blood and brought cosmic destruction. In Guatemala, indigenous communities speak of the Sikini, invisible spirits that attack those who have forgotten their ancestral obligations. But what happened next shocked the entire island. In December 1995, a group of local hunters claimed to have cornered a chupacabra in the caves of El Yunque rainforest. Led by a man named Roberto Morales, they tracked the creature for 3 days, following a trail of drained animals deeper and deeper into the mountain's heart. The caves they found weren't natural. Carved into the limestone were chambers filled with what could only be described as organic technology, pulsing bioluminescent structures that seemed to breathe and pulse with their own rhythm. The walls were covered in a substance that looked like crystallized blood, and the air hummed with an energy that made their teeth ache. At the center of the largest chamber, they found the Chupacabra. But it wasn't alone. Dozens of them hung from the ceiling like enormous bats, their gray-green skin glistening with moisture. In the center of the group was something larger, more developed, a Chupacabra that had grown to the size of a small horse, its spines elongated into elaborate crests, its eyes burning with an intelligence that seemed almost sorrowful. When it spoke, and Roberto swears it spoke in perfect Spanish, its voice carried the weight of centuries. "We are the memory of pain," it said. "We are what remains when everything else is taken. You created us with your cruelty, and now we sustain ourselves with your life." The creature gestured to the walls, and Roberto realized the crystallized substance wasn't just blood. It was history, somehow preserved and transformed into something living. The walls told stories in flowing red patterns: the arrival of Columbus, the extinction of the Taino, the horror of the Middle Passage, the endless cycles of exploitation and violence that had soaked the Caribbean soil in blood for 5 centuries. "Every drop we take is a drop that was stolen," the creature continued. "We return what was always ours." But here's what investigators never mention. The Chupacabra doesn't kill randomly. Analysis of attack patterns reveals a disturbing intelligence behind the selection of victims. The animals targeted are almost always owned by descendants of colonial families, by those whose wealth was built on historical exploitation, by corporations that continue to extract resources from the land without regard for indigenous rights. Small farmers who work the land respectfully, who maintain traditional relationships with the natural world, who honor the indigenous heritage of the islands, their animals remain untouched. The Chupacabra, it seems, is not just a predator. It's an instrument of supernatural justice. As Roberto and his companions fled the caves, they carried with them a revelation that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The Chupacabra isn't an alien visitor or a government experiment. It's something far more terrifying. It's what happens when historical trauma achieves physical form, when the accumulated pain of generations of oppressed peoples transforms into something that refuses to stay buried. The blood it drinks isn't just sustenance, it's remembrance. And as long as the wounds of history remain unhealed, as long as the crimes of the past go unacknowledged, the Chupacabra will continue to hunt, continue to drain, continue to remind us that some debts can only be paid in blood. But blood isn't the only thing these creatures hunger for. In the humid forests of Malaysia, another entity stalks the night, one that feeds on something even more precious than blood, something that, once taken, can never be returned. Chapter 3. Pontianak. Malaysian mothers count their newborns' heartbeats for exactly 7 minutes after birth. Because if the count reaches 400, they know their child will become a Pontianak. In the oil palm plantations of Borneo, workers still refuse night shifts near specific trees. The Pontianak doesn't just kill pregnant women, she tears open their wombs and devours the unborn child. But only after forcing the mother to watch. What drives a spirit to such precise, maternal cruelty? The smell always comes first. The sickly, sweet scent of frangipani flowers mixed with something rotten, something dead. In the villages along the Rajang River, that smell means one thing: run. Don't look back. Don't try to help whoever might be screaming. Just run. Because the Pontianak is hunting, and once she has your scent, death is the kindest fate you can hope for. Siti Rahman learned this lesson on the night her sister Amina went into labor. It was the monsoon season of 1987, and the rain hammered the tin roof of their kampong house like bullets. The midwife was stranded on the other side of the swollen river, and Amina's contractions were coming faster, harder, each one tearing a scream from her throat that echoed through the storm. Siti had delivered babies before. It was woman's knowledge passed down through generations. But as she knelt between her sister's legs, watching the crown of the baby's head appear, she smelled it, frangipani and decay. So strong it made her gag. The oil palm trees outside their window began to sway without wind. In the distance, beyond the rain, came the sound of singing. A woman's voice, beautiful and melodic, singing a lullaby in the old Malay tongue. But the words were wrong, twisted, talking about empty cradles and hungry mouths and blood that tastes like mother's milk. Amina heard it too. Her eyes went wide with terror, and she gripped Siti's hand so hard that bones creaked. "She's coming," Amina whispered. "The hungry mother. She's coming for my baby." The Pontianak is not simply a vampiric spirit. She is the embodiment of maternal love, transformed into something monstrous, something that speaks to the deepest fears of women in cultures where childbirth was often a death sentence. According to Malay folklore, she was once a woman who died in childbirth, her soul corrupted by the trauma of dying before she could hold her child. But the true horror of the Pontianak lies not in her death, but in her resurrection. She returns not as a mother seeking her lost child, but as a predator who steals the children of others. Driven by a jealousy so profound, it has twisted her very essence. She appears as a beautiful woman in white, with long black hair that reaches the ground. But her beauty is a trap, a lure designed to draw victims close enough for her to reveal her true nature. When the Pontianak attacks, she transforms. Her fingernails extend into razor-sharp claws. Her beautiful face elongates into something bestial, with a mouth that opens far too wide, revealing rows of teeth like broken glass. But most terrifying of all is the hole where her back should be. A gaping wound that never heals. A reminder of the life that was cut short. Siti could hear the singing getting closer, and with it came the rustle of silk against leaves, the soft pad of bare feet on wet earth. Through the rain-streaked window, she caught glimpses of white fabric moving between the palm trees, too fluid, too graceful, like fabric floating underwater. "Don't let her in," Amina gasped. "Whatever happens, don't let her in." But the Pontianak doesn't need permission to enter. She can slip through the smallest cracks, flow like mist through keyholes, materialize wherever there is shadow and fear. The traditional protections, iron nails driven into door frames, limestone scattered across thresholds, the burning of kemenyan incense. These are prayers more than barriers, desperate attempts to ward off a force that represents every mother's nightmare. The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, Sidi could hear her own heartbeat, Amina's labored breathing, and something else. A soft tapping at the window, like fingernails against glass. She turned, and her blood turned to ice. A woman stood outside the window, her face pressed against the glass. She was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, with skin like polished bone and eyes that reflected the lamplight like a cat's. Her lips were moving, mouthing words that Sidi couldn't hear, but somehow understood. "Let me help. Let me hold the baby. Let me love the baby the way I never could love mine." But this isn't even the strangest part. The Pontianak doesn't just hunt randomly. She is drawn specifically to women in labor, to the moment when the boundary between life and death becomes thin, when new souls enter the world through pain and blood. Malaysian folklore describes her as being able to smell pregnancy from miles away, tracking the scent of life in formation like a shark following blood in the water. Research into historical records reveals disturbing patterns. In rural areas of Malaysia and Indonesia, unexplained deaths of pregnant women spike during certain lunar phases, particularly during the dark moon when shadows are deepest. The bodies are always found in the same condition, torn open from navel to breastbone, the unborn child missing, the mother's face frozen in an expression of absolute horror. But what investigators never report is the state of the crime scenes. Witnesses describe finding frangipani flowers scattered around the bodies, even in locations where no frangipani trees grow. The flowers are always wilted, blackened, as if they've been touched by something that drains life from whatever it encounters. Dr. Rashid bin Hassan, a forensic pathologist who has examined dozens of these cases over his 30-year career, speaks of patterns that defy medical explanation. "The incisions are too precise," he explains, his voice hushed. "They show knowledge of anatomy that would require years of medical training. But they're made from the inside out, as if something clawed its way out of the womb rather than being cut from outside." The psychological profile of the Pontianak reveals something even more disturbing. Unlike other supernatural predators who kill out of hunger or instinct, the Pontianak kills out of love. A love so corrupted by trauma and loss that it has become indistinguishable from hate. She doesn't simply steal children. She believes she is rescuing them from the pain of living, taking them to a place where they can be together forever, where no one will ever abandon them again. As the beautiful woman at the window began to smile, Sidi saw her teeth. Not the broken glass of folklore, but something worse. They were perfect, small and white like a child's teeth, as if she had never grown up, never moved beyond the moment of her own violent death. The glass began to crack under the pressure of the Pontianak's touch. Spiderweb fractures spread outward from where her fingertips pressed against the window, and through the cracks seeped the smell of frangipani and decay, so strong now that Sidi could taste it on her tongue. Amina's contractions intensified, and she began to push. The baby was coming whether they were ready or not. And outside the window, the Pontianak pressed harder, her beautiful face contorting with need, with hunger, with a love so desperate it had become monstrous. The window shattered. Glass showered the room like crystalline rain, and the Pontianak flowed through the opening like smoke, her white dress billowing around her as she materialized inside the house. Up close, her beauty was even more terrible. Flawless skin that glowed with its own light, hair that moved as if underwater, eyes that held the depth of eternal sorrow. Such a beautiful baby, the Pontianak whispered, her voice like silk being torn. Such a perfect, innocent baby. Let me hold her. Let me love her the way mothers should love their children. Siti positioned herself between the spirit and her sister, clutching a crisp blade that had been blessed by 7 generations of Bomo. Traditional healers who understood the delicate balance between the living and the dead. The iron blade gleamed in the lamplight, inscribed with verses from the Quran and older symbols that predated Islam. Protection passed down from the Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms that once ruled these lands. But as she raised the blade, the Pontianak did something unexpected. She began to weep. Tears of silver flowed down her perfect cheeks, and her voice broke with genuine anguish. "I just want to hold a baby," she sobbed. "Just once. I died before I could hold my child. I died with empty arms and an empty heart. Please, just let me hold her for a moment. Just let me know what it feels like to be a mother." The raw pain in the spirit's voice was so genuine, so heart-wrenching, that Siti almost lowered the blade. This was the true horror of the Pontianak. Not her monstrous appearance or her supernatural powers, but the fact that underneath it all, she was still a mother who had lost everything. Her monstrosity was born not from evil, but from love that had nowhere to go. Maternal instinct turned inside out by trauma and loss. Behind Siti, Amina gave one final push, and the baby slipped into the world with a wet rush of blood and fluid. The newborn's cry filled the room, healthy, strong, alive. And at the sound, the Pontianak's weeping stopped. Her beautiful face began to change. The skin stretched tight over sharp bones. The mouth opened wider than any human mouth should open. The eyes turned black as dried blood. And from the hole in her back came a sound like wind through dead leaves, like the echo of a scream that had been building for decades. "Mine," she whispered, and lunged forward. Siti drove the crisp blade deep into the Pontianak's chest, right where her heart should have been. The spirit shrieked, not with pain, but with betrayal, with the anguish of hope destroyed once again. Silver blood flowed from the wound, hissing where it touched the floor, filling the room with the smell of burning flowers. But as the Pontianak collapsed, her beautiful face returning as the monstrous features faded away, she spoke one last time. "I will wait," she whispered. "I will always wait. And when your daughter grows up, when she carries a child of her own, I will be there. Because love like mine never dies. It only grows stronger." The body dissolved into frangipani petals that turned to ash before they hit the floor. But her words lingered in the air, like a curse, a promise, a warning that some hungers transcend death itself. 27 years later, when Amina's daughter Zara went into labor with her first child, she too smelled frangipani flowers in the night. Because the Pontianak is patient, and a mother's love, even one twisted into something monstrous, is forever. But maternal love isn't the only force that can transcend death and transform into something terrible. In the villages of West Africa, another entity stalks the night, one that reveals the dark side of protection itself, showing us what happens when guardianship becomes possession. Chapter 4. Adze. Ghanaian elders still perform the firefly test on newborn babies, If the child's eyes track flying insects with unusual intensity, they know they're dealing with an Adze. Among the Yu people of West Africa, this vampire takes the form of a firefly to slip through bed nets and drain sleeping children. But the Adze doesn't just feed on blood. It feeds on dreams, leaving its victims trapped in a waking nightmare. What created a creature that hunts the boundary between sleep and death? The drums had been silent for 3 days. In the village of Kapando, nestled along the shores of Lake Volta, silence was never a good sign. Drums were the heartbeat of the community, the constant rhythm that connected the living to the ancestors, the earthbound to the spirit world. When the drums stopped, it meant something had gone terribly wrong. Kwame Agbotui knew the signs. He was the village's shrine keeper, trained from childhood to recognize the subtle shifts in the spiritual atmosphere that preceded supernatural visitations. The air had grown thick and heavy, despite the seasonal winds from the lake. Children woke screaming from nightmares they couldn't remember. Adults found themselves exhausted despite full nights of sleep, their dreams stolen, their rest transformed into something that drained rather than restored. And then there were the fireflies. They appeared at dusk in numbers that defied natural explanation, clouds of them swirling around the village like golden snow. Beautiful, hypnotic, wrong. Because fireflies in Ghana don't behave like this. They don't swarm, they don't pulse in unison, and they certainly don't seem to watch you with intelligence burning behind their tiny lights. The Adze had come to Kapando, and someone was going to die. The Adze is perhaps the most insidious of all vampiric entities because it attacks at the moment of greatest vulnerability. When we sleep, when our conscious defenses are down, when we exist in the liminal space between waking and dreaming. Unlike the violent predators of other folklores, the Adze is subtle, patient, methodical. It doesn't tear apart its victims in moments of spectacular violence. Instead, it slowly drains them over weeks or months, feeding not just on blood, but on the very essence of rest, turning sleep itself into a weapon. According to Yue tradition, the Adze was once a powerful sorcerer who sought to achieve immortality by transferring his consciousness into the body of a firefly. The ritual required the sacrifice of his own children, the drinking of their blood while they slept, the consumption of their dreams to fuel his transformation. But the magic was flawed, cursed by the innocent blood he had spilled. Instead of achieving true immortality, he became trapped between forms. Sometimes firefly, sometimes mosquito, sometimes human, but never fully any of them. Kwame's grandmother had taught him the old stories when he was young, back when such tales were considered quaint folklore rather than urgent survival information. The Adze chooses families, she had told him, her weathered hands tracing protective symbols in the red earth. It follows bloodlines, generation after generation, feeding on the dreams of children until the line dies out. It is patient and it is hungry, and it remembers every slight, every attempt to drive it away. But what makes the Adze truly terrifying is its ability to exist simultaneously in the physical and spiritual realms. As a firefly, it can slip through the finest mosquito nets, navigate the smallest gaps in walls and windows. As a mosquito, it can feed undetected, leaving victims with mysterious anemia and a constant sense of fatigue. But in its human form, tall, thin, with skin that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it, it can manipulate dreams directly, turning restful sleep into psychological torture. The first victim was always a child. They were more susceptible, their boundaries between dreaming and waking more fluid. 8-year-old Isi Mensa had been found in her bed 3 mornings ago, alive but wrong. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and her eyes had sunk deep into her skull. But worse than the physical changes was her behavior. She no longer spoke above a whisper, and when she did speak, it was to describe dreams that no child should have. Visions of flying through darkness, of feeding on light, of feeling her body dissolve into swarms of insects. She dreams his dreams now. Kwame's assistant, a young man named Kofi, had whispered when they examined the child. The Adze has marked her. She'll be dead within a week unless we act. But acting against an Adze requires knowledge that few possess anymore. The old ways, the traditional protections, had been diluted by years of colonial suppression and Christian conversion. Many of the village elders had forgotten the proper rituals, the specific herbs, the ancient words that could bind a creature that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Kwame spent 2 days consulting the oracle bones, reading patterns in palm oil and kola nut shells, trying to determine why the Adze had chosen Kapando. What he discovered chilled him to the bone. The creature wasn't here by chance. It had been summoned. Someone in the village had called it, either deliberately or through actions that had torn holes in the protective barriers between the physical and spiritual worlds. The answer came on the 3rd night, when the fireflies gathered in their thousands around the house of Kobina Asante, the village's newest resident. Kobina had moved to Kapando 6 months ago, claiming to be a traditional healer from Togo. He practiced a syncretic form of magic that blended Yu traditions with foreign elements, symbols and rituals that Kwame didn't recognize, techniques that seemed designed to open doorways rather than close them. As Kwame watched from the shadows, the fireflies began to coalesce, their individual lights merging into larger forms, more complex patterns. And at the center of the swarm, a human figure began to materialize. Tall, emaciated, with skin that seemed to drink in the golden light of the insects surrounding it. The Adze had taken its human form, and it was walking toward Isi's house. Kwame moved quickly, pulling iron filings from his medicine bag and scattering them across the path. Iron disrupted supernatural entities, but the Adze merely laughed, a sound like wind through dry leaves, and stepped over the barrier as if it didn't exist. "Old man," the creature spoke, its voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You practice the old ways in a new world. Do you not understand that the barriers have fallen? The ancestors have been forgotten, their protection withdrawn. This village belongs to whoever is strong enough to claim it. This is where the colonial history of West Africa intersects with supernatural folklore in ways that are both subtle and profound. The systematic destruction of traditional belief systems didn't just eliminate cultural practices. It created spiritual vacuums, spaces where protective traditions once stood firm but now lay broken and vulnerable. The Adze, like many supernatural predators, thrives in these gaps, feeding on communities that have lost their connection to ancestral wisdom. But Kwame had not forgotten everything. As the Adze moved past him toward Essie's house, he began to chant in the old language, words his grandmother had taught him, syllables that had been spoken by Yue shamans for over 1,000 years. The fireflies suddenly scattered, their synchronized dance breaking apart into chaos, and the Adze stumbled as its physical form began to waver. "You remember more than I expected," the creature hissed. "But memory is not power, and I am very old, very hungry, and very tired of being denied." The Adze raised its hand, and every firefly within 100 yards suddenly blazed with brilliant light. The illumination was so intense that Kwame was temporarily blinded. And in that moment of darkness, he felt the creature's true nature pressing against his mind. Thousands of years of accumulated hunger, of dreams stolen and consumed, of children who had died in their sleep while their parents slept peacefully beside them, never knowing that their little ones were being devoured from the inside out. But this isn't even the strangest part. As the light faded and Kwame's vision returned, he saw that the Adze was no longer alone. Around it stood the translucent forms of its victims, dozens of children from across the centuries, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes reflecting the same golden light as the fireflies. They moved in perfect synchronization with their killer, as if they had become extensions of its will. "My children," the Adze whispered, spreading its arms wide. "My beautiful, eternal children. They sleep forever now, and their dreams sustain me. Would you like to see what they dream?" Suddenly, Kwame was no longer standing in the village of Kapando. He was flying through endless darkness, his consciousness merged with swarms of glowing insects. Below him stretched a landscape of sleeping minds, each one a pool of light that he could taste, sample, drain. The sensation was intoxicating, the pure essence of human dreams, unfiltered by waking thoughts or rational fears. But with the euphoria came understanding. The dreams the Adze fed upon weren't just random nocturnal fantasies. They were the dreams that mattered most. Children's dreams of growing up, of becoming doctors or teachers or farmers. Young women's dreams of a motherhood. Old men's dreams of seeing their grandchildren prosper. The Adze consumed hope itself, leaving its victims alive but spiritually hollow, capable of existing but not of truly living. The vision shattered as Kwame bit down on his tongue, using physical pain to anchor himself to reality. The Adze tilted its head, studying him with interest. "Impressive," it said. "Most humans lose themselves completely in the dream flight. You have stronger will than most. Perhaps I will keep you as a companion rather than food." Behind the creature, little Essie's window began to glow with soft golden light. Inside, Kwame could see the child sitting up in bed, her eyes wide and unseeing, her lips moving in silent conversation with someone only she could see. The Adze's ghostly children were already inside her dreams, preparing the way for their master's feeding. Kwame reached into his medicine bag and pulled out his last resort, a piece of iron that had been blessed by 7 generations of shrine keepers, forged in fires that had burned continuously for over 300 years. The metal was warm to the touch, almost alive, thrumming with accumulated spiritual power. "You want to feed on dreams?" Kwame said, holding the iron high. "Then feed on mine." He pressed the blessed metal against his own forehead and opened his mind completely, offering his dreams, his memories, his very essence to the creature. But hidden within the offering was a trap. Every protective ward he had ever learned, every binding spell his grandmother had taught him, every scrap of ancestral wisdom compressed into a single, devastating spiritual weapon. The Adze lunged forward eagerly, its mouth opening wide to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. It latched onto Kwame's offered consciousness like a starving man at a feast, drinking deeply of his memories and dreams. And as it fed, the iron wards flowed into it like poison, binding its essence, trapping it between forms. The creature screamed, a sound like 1,000 fireflies dying at once, and its human form began to collapse. But it didn't dissolve into nothingness. Instead, it contracted, compressed, folded in on itself until it took the form of a single firefly, glowing weakly in the pre-dawn darkness. Kwame caught the firefly gently in his cupped hands. The creature pulsed once, twice, and then its light went out forever. But in that final moment, he felt something else. Relief, gratitude, the peace of a soul finally allowed to rest after centuries of hunger and hunting. The ghostly children faded away, their faces peaceful at last. In Isi's house, the golden glow vanished, and the little girl fell into natural, healing sleep. Across the village, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, and for the first time in days, the drums began to beat again. But as Kwame buried the firefly's body in consecrated ground, he understood something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Adze hadn't been evil by choice. It had been a father who loved his children so much that he was willing to damn himself to protect them from death. The curse that transformed him was born not from malice, but from a parent's desperate attempt to keep his family together forever, even if forever meant an eternity of hunger and horror. The most terrifying monsters, Kwame realized, are often created by love that has nowhere to go, protection that becomes possession, care that transforms into consumption. And in recognizing this truth, he had taken the first step toward understanding the creature we'll encounter next, one that embodies the dark side of family loyalty itself. But family bonds can become chains in other cultures as well. In the Philippines, where extended families live in close proximity across generations, another entity stalks the night. One that reveals what happens when the desire to nurture becomes a hunger that can never be satisfied. Chapter 5. Aswang. Filipino children are taught to sleep with scissors under their pillows because the Aswang can smell pregnancy from 3 villages away. In the provinces of Capiz and Aklan, this shapeshifter doesn't just kill, it specifically targets unborn children and pregnant women with surgical precision. But here's what missionaries never recorded. The Aswang appears as a trusted family member, often the victim's own grandmother or aunt. How do you protect yourself from evil that wears the face of love? The sound was wrong. That's what Maria Santos noticed first. The soft tick-tick-tick on the nipa roof of her family's Bahay Kubo, like fingernails tapping against bamboo. But it was the dry season in Antique Province, and there shouldn't have been any rain. Maria was 7 months pregnant, alone in the house while her husband worked the night shift at the sugar mill. The ticking stopped. In the sudden silence, she heard other sounds. Fabric against bamboo, someone moving carefully across the elevated floor. "Antonio," she called softly. No answer. The footsteps moved through the main room, but they sounded wrong. Too heavy, as if whoever was walking carried enormous weight. The smell reached her next, something sour and metallic, like copper coins in stagnant water. She pressed against the bamboo wall, one hand protecting her swollen belly, the other reaching for scissors beneath her pillow. Her Lola had taught her. Scissors cut spiritual bonds, salt creates barriers, prayers confuse entities. The footsteps stopped outside her bedroom door. Through the bamboo slats, she saw a shadow, wrong shape, too tall, with extensions like wings or multiple arms. "Maria Anak," it said, using the Hiligaynon word for child. "It's Lola Rosa. I've come to help you with the baby." But Lola Rosa had been dead for 3 years. The voice was perfect, exactly how her grandmother had spoken. Same gentle cadence, same pet names, same loving tone. "Your baby is in danger," the voice continued. "There are Aswang hunting pregnant women. Let me in so I can protect you. This is the true horror of the Aswang. It doesn't simply mimic family members. It possesses their memories, mannerisms, deepest expressions of love. The creature knew every lullaby her grandmother had sung, every story told, every gesture of affection. The shadow began changing shape, growing larger. Through the slats, she saw wings unfolding, multiple arms extending. The voice continued in grandmother's gentle tones, but underneath, a wet clicking sound like insects in a human throat. The baby is so beautiful, Anak. I can see her through your skin, but she's in danger. Let me reach inside and fix what's wrong. But this isn't even the strangest part. As the creature spoke, Maria felt something moving in her womb. Not normal, stirring, but something responding to the Aswang's voice with agitation. The baby was reacting, recognizing a threat her mother's conscious mind struggled to accept. The bamboo door shook as the creature pressed against it. But Maria remembered her grandmother's advice. The creatures were compelled by certain behaviors, trapped by their own nature. "Lola," she called out, "if you're really here to help, tell me the prayer you taught me for protecting babies." The voice paused. That clicking sound grew louder, more agitated. "Prayers are not enough, Anak. You must let me touch the baby directly." But the real Lola Rosa would never have needed to ask about the prayer. She had made Maria memorize it, word for word. The creature could mimic voice and mannerisms, but couldn't access memories it never possessed. Maria began reciting the prayer in Old Hiligaynon dialect. As she spoke, the baby grew calmer, and the shadow seemed to shrink, becoming more human-shaped but less substantial. The Aswang hissed, a sound no human throat could make. "Clever girl," it said, voice now a horrible parody of human speech. "But you cannot stay awake forever. That baby belongs to me now. I have tasted her essence through your dreams, and she will be mine." The shadow disappeared, but Maria heard it moving across the roof again, that same deliberate tick, tick, tick. The Aswang was leaving, but only temporarily. It would return, night after night, wearing different faces, until it found a way to feed. When Antonio returned at dawn, he found Maria sitting upright, scissors in one hand, rosary in the other. In rural Philippines, the Aswang isn't folklore, it's reality. They moved in with his parents the next day, seeking protection in numbers. But the Aswang is patient, and sooner or later, every expectant mother faces the moment of greatest vulnerability. When her child enters the world, soft and helpless and utterly defenseless. Chapter 6. Krasue. Thai nurses in rural hospitals check every female corpse for missing internal organs because the Krasue steals bodies from the inside out. This floating head with trailing entrails appears as a beautiful woman by day, but at sunset, her head detaches and hunts for filth and feces while her empty body sleeps. But the truly disturbing part? She's often someone you know, your neighbor, your co-worker, your friend, living a double life of supernatural horror. What transforms an ordinary woman into a creature that feeds on human waste? Dr. Siriporn Watanasak walked through Siri Raj Hospital's morgue at 2 a.m., reviewing autopsy reports. Mrs. Lamai Chit Prasert, age 34, had died suddenly in her sleep. Perfectly healthy woman, until they opened her up. Her internal organs were missing, not surgically removed, just gone, as if dissolved from inside. The empty body cavity was coated with something like saliva mixed with digestive enzymes. Something had methodically consumed her organs while leaving the external body intact. Dr. Siriporn had grown up in rural Surin province. She recognized the signs. This was Krasue, the floating head that feeds on filth and blood, the woman who lives 2 lives. Over 6 months, 7 women had died under similar circumstances. All found alone, all died between sunset and sunrise, all discovered with organs missing and that same enzyme coating. Neighbors reported seeing lights moving through victims' homes. Not electric lights, but soft, organic glows that pulsed like living things. Around 4 a.m., the lights went out. Emergency power bathed the morgue in red light. In that crimson illumination, Dr. Siriporn saw something that would haunt her forever. Floating near the ceiling was a woman's head, beautiful and serene, with long black hair moving like underwater. Below, trailing like ribbons, were her internal organs: heart, lungs, liver, intestines, all glowing with phosphorescent light. The head drifted across the ceiling, pausing above each examination table. When it reached the latest victim, it opened its eyes, completely human, yet utterly alien. She was so lonely, the creature whispered, so afraid of dying alone. I gave her company in her final moments. The organs moved with purpose, reaching out like tentacles. The heart beat with slow rhythm. The lungs breathed. The intestines writhed like serpents. "You know what I am," it continued. "But do you know what I was? I was a nurse. Like you, I dedicated my life to healing, but I made a mistake. I fell in love with a dying patient. I couldn't accept that medicine had failed him." The creature's organs pulsed brighter, the air filled with frangipani scent mixed with medical disinfectant. I practiced black magic to save him, consumed flesh from morgue corpses, thinking it would give me power to transfer his disease to myself. But the magic was corrupted. He died anyway, and I became this. Healer transformed into predator. But this isn't even the strangest part. The red lights flickered, and in brief darkness, Dr. Siriporn glimpsed the Krasue's true face: rotting flesh, empty eye sockets, broken teeth. The beauty was facade, maintained by supernatural power, but constantly decaying beneath. "The transformation isn't complete," the creature whispered desperately. "Part of me remains human, trapped inside this form, watching helplessly as I do things that disgust me. I remember the Hippocratic Oath. Every night as I feed on filth and blood, that human part screams in anguish. You could help me," it pleaded. "There must be a way to reverse this curse, to separate human from monster. I'm so tired of being hungry, so tired of hurting people I want to help." This was the true horror, not its appearance or abilities, but that it remained partially human, capable of suffering, aware of its evil, but powerless to stop. The creature wasn't just predator, it was victim, trapped in cycles of hunger and self-loathing. Before Dr. Siriporn could respond, normal lights flickered back on. The creature vanished like smoke, leaving only frangipani scent and memory of that pleading voice. The Krasue had asked for help, but some transformations run too deep for medicine to heal. Some hungers become so fundamental that removing them would mean death. Sometimes, the only mercy is accepting that not all monsters chose to become what they are. Chapter 7, Jiangshi. Chinese morticians still place written prayers in the mouths of corpses because the Jiangshi rise when spiritual energy becomes trapped in dead flesh. During the Qing dynasty, these hopping vampires multiplied so rapidly that entire villages were abandoned in Guangxi province. But unlike Western zombies, the Jiangshi retain their memories, their personalities, even their love for family. They simply can't control their need to drain qi from the living. What happens when your beloved grandfather returns from the dead, still recognizing you, still caring for you, but unable to stop himself from killing you? The bamboo wind chimes had been silent for 3 days. In the courtyard of the Chen family compound in Guilin, this was an omen that chilled the blood. Master Chen Weiming had crafted those chimes to catch the slightest shift in the spiritual energy. When they fell silent, it meant the qi itself had stagnated, creating conditions where death and life became confused. Li Mei Chen knelt beside her grandfather's bed, watching his labored breathing. Grandfather Chen had been the family patriarch for 73 years, a scholar who had survived the Cultural Revolution by hiding his Taoist texts. But now, as autumn settled over Guangxi province, his time was ending. The old man's eyes snapped open at dawn. Something was wrong with his gaze, too bright, too intense. When he spoke, his voice carried strange resonance. "Mei Mei," he whispered. "The balance is broken. The hungry ghosts walk freely now. I fear I may not be able to resist what's coming." Before Li Mei could respond, Grandfather Chen's body went rigid. His breathing stopped. She felt for a pulse. Nothing. By every medical standard, her grandfather was dead. But the Jiangshi don't follow medical standards. According to Taoist tradition, death isn't singular, but complex. Different soul aspects separate at different rates. When interrupted by trauma or spiritual imbalance, the Po soul can become trapped while the Hun soul departs, creating something neither alive nor properly dead. Li Mei performed traditional duties, washing the body, dressing him in finest robes, placing coins over his eyes. But troubling signs appeared. The body wasn't cooling. The flesh remained warm. Twice, she saw his fingers twitch. On the third night, as Li Mei kept vigil, the incense flames began bending toward the corpse as if it were drawing in smoke and prayers. The floor developed cracks radiating outward like spider webs. The air thickened. At midnight, Grandfather Chen sat up. The movement was wrong. Too sudden, too controlled. His eyes opened, pupils turned completely white like clouded jade, but they focused on her face with terrible clarity. "Mei Mei," he said, voice exactly as she remembered. Gentle, loving, warm. "I cannot seem to leave you." When he tried to stand, his legs wouldn't support him properly. Instead, he began the characteristic hopping motion of the Jiangshi. His arms went rigid, extending straight from his shoulders. His breathing became harsh, rasping echoes. But this isn't even the strangest part. Despite his supernatural condition, Grandfather Chen retained complete awareness. Unlike mindless Western zombies, the Jiangshi possess full memories and personalities. They remember families, relationships, responsibilities. They simply can't control their physical needs. "I can feel it," he told her, hopping awkwardly around the room. "The hunger. It burns like fire, like drowning. I need the qi of the living to sustain this form. But I don't want to hurt you. I love you, child." The Jiangshi's need for qi, life force flowing through all living things, isn't choice, but compulsion automatic as breathing. It's spiritual thirst that grows more urgent each moment, accompanied by full emotional awareness of what it means. "You must bind me," he pleaded, voice breaking with anguish. "Use yellow papers, blessed rope. Make me unable to harm you while we find a solution." Li Mei retrieved spiritual supplies, protective talismans, blessed rope, confusion mirrors. But as she approached with bindings, he held up one rigid hand. "Wait. I'm not the only one. The spiritual imbalance affecting me, it affects others. Throughout Jiangshi, the dead refuse to stay buried. Some resist their hunger like me, but others have embraced what they've become, hunting in groups, settling old scores." Outside, confirming his warnings, came sounds of multiple Jiangshi moving through village streets. Hopping gates, crashing doors, neighbors screaming as deceased relatives rose from graves. Most horrifying were the recognizable voices among supernatural attacks. Mrs. Wang's husband called her name with the same loving tone he'd used in life. The Liu family's infant cried with the same heartbreaking wail from his illness. The Jiangshi weren't anonymous monsters. They were community members, family, beloved relatives returned with intact memories, but driven by needs making them dangerous to everyone they'd once loved. Even bound by blessed rope and protective talismans, Grandfather Chen's condition deteriorated. His skin took greenish pallor, hair fell out in clumps. Without constant qi replenishment, his body showed advanced decay signs. "I won't last much longer," he told Li Mei. "Before I crumble to dust, there's something about our family history that may explain this." He revealed their ancestor Chen Mingshan had been a Ming Dynasty Taoist sorcerer, experimenting with immortality techniques, methods for trapping spiritual energy in physical forms. During the Cultural Revolution, desperate scholars attempted using these forbidden methods to preserve knowledge and culture. The spiritual imbalance wasn't random. It resulted from multiple immortality magic attempts, creating cumulative distortions until the ground was saturated with confused qi, animating any spiritually sensitive corpse. "Promise me," Grandfather Chen urged with desperate intensity. "Don't try to preserve this knowledge. Some wisdom is too dangerous to survive." But Li Mei had made a different decision. Looking at her grandfather, still recognizably himself despite supernatural condition, still loving despite monstrous hunger, she realized Jiangshi represented something more complex than evil. They were love refusing to accept death, relationships persisting even when harmful. As rope bindings weakened from his intensifying hunger, Li Mei made a choice that would haunt folklore for generations. She pressed hands against his chest and deliberately shared her qi, not draining herself completely, but offering enough to stabilize his condition temporarily. The change was immediate. His skin regained natural color, movements became fluid, eyes cleared enough to show traces of original brown beneath cloudy white. He was still supernatural hunger, but hunger temporarily satisfied by love rather than violence. "What have you done?" he whispered, voice carrying gratitude and horror. "I've given you time," Li Mei replied. "Time to prove some bonds are stronger than death itself." But sharing qi created connection to his supernatural existence. She remained alive, but could feel the spiritual imbalance pull. She'd stepped voluntarily into the space between life and death. Outside, her grandfather called to fellow Jiangshi, not in hunger or anger, but urging them to remember what they'd been, to fight what they'd become, to find existence ways not requiring destruction of everything once loved. Some answered his call, others didn't. But Li Mei understood she'd witnessed something unprecedented. A Jiangshi choosing love over hunger, family over feeding, restraint over irresistible consumption compulsion. The question remained whether such choice could be sustained, whether love could triumph over supernatural existence's fundamental needs, or whether she'd simply delayed inevitable tragedy. Chapter 8. Empusa. Greek soldiers returning from battle learned to fear beautiful women who approached their camps at night because the Empusa could appear as any man's deepest desire. In ancient Athens, this shape-shifting demon was blamed for the deaths of over 300 young men who were found drained of blood with expressions of ecstatic terror. But here's what Aristotle never recorded. The Empusa doesn't just steal blood. She steals the very capacity for love, leaving survivors unable to form emotional connections for the rest of their lives. How do you defend against a predator that attacks through your own desires? The marble steps of the Parthenon gleamed silver under the full moon as Lysander walked through the Athenian agora. It was the 3rd year of the Peloponnesian War, and he'd returned from Plataea's siege with victory news. But instead of celebration, unnatural quiet had settled over Athens. Young men were dying, not in battle, but in beds, private chambers, hidden groves, found with peaceful expressions as if dying in perfect bliss, but completely drained of blood through delicate tooth marks. Witnesses reported seeing them with extraordinarily beautiful women who vanished like smoke when approached. The Empusa had come to Athens, seducing the city's most eligible men to death, a creature appearing as their perfect lover. Lysander knew the stories from fellow soldiers. The Empusa wasn't merely a blood-drinking monster, but something sophisticated, a supernatural predator feeding not just on blood, but on romantic and sexual love's essence. She could read deepest desires and appear as the perfect embodiment of everything a man wanted. The true horror wasn't her abilities, but psychological understanding. She didn't simply drain blood. She consumed love's capacity itself, leaving survivors emotionally hollow, unable to form meaningful human connections. As Lysander walked empty streets, he felt eyes watching from shadows. The Empusa was hunting tonight. But he was a 20-battle veteran, trained in war and survival, blessed by Athena with wisdom and courage. The attack came not as expected. The Empusa didn't appear as a stranger, but as Penthesilea, the Amazon queen he'd fallen in love with in Scythia 3 years earlier. The woman he'd been forced to leave when duty called him back to Athens. Lysander, she called from marble colonnade shadows, voice exactly as remembered. Melodic, strong, with northern tribes' faint accent. I've been waiting for you. She stepped into moonlight. Perfect, not just beautiful, but precisely the woman he remembered. Down to the small scar where an enemy spear had grazed her cheek. Same leather armor, same double-headed axe. But this isn't even the strangest part. She wasn't just mimicking Penthesilea's appearance. She was recreating specific relationship moments. The head tilt when thinking. The exact gesture calling him to bed. The particular expression before revealing something important. "The war is over for us," she said, moving closer with remembered fluid grace. "I've come to take you home, away from this death and violence. We can be together forever now." She reached out to touch his face. Her skin was warm, real, alive. She smelled like leather, steel, wild northern steppes herbs. Her kiss tasted like honey, wine, and peace after years of warfare. The Empusa's power lay not in illusion, but emotional truth. She didn't disguise herself as Penthesilea. She became her, accessing Lysander's memories and recreating not just appearance, but emotional reality. Every word, gesture, expression was pulled directly from his experiences, made manifest through supernatural power. She knew Lysander was tired, spiritually depleted by constant violence, lost friends, fighting in a conflict that might never end. She knew he questioned his cause's honor, wondered if dying for Athens was worth sacrificing personal happiness. Deep down, he wanted permission to walk away from duty, to choose love over honor, and she offered exactly what he wanted most. Not just the woman he loved, but reason to abandon everything else. "Come with me tonight," she whispered, leading him toward olive groves. "We can disappear into mountains where wars don't matter, live simply and love freely." As they walked moonlit city streets, Lysander felt the years of tension melting away. This was what he dreamed of during siege months: brutal combat, sleepless nights wondering if he'd see home again. But warrior training sounded warning bells. The Empusa was skilled, but not perfect. Small details were wrong. Penthesileia's walking rhythm slightly off, grip too strong, breathing pattern not quite matching memory. More significantly, emotional manipulation was too precise, perfectly tailored to his needs. The real Penthesileia had been complex with her own desires and fears. This version was like a mirror, reflecting only what he wanted to see. In the olive grove, she turned to face him. In silver moonlight through leaves, her shadow showed true form, tall and thin with elongated limbs and bronze legs instead of human feet. The Empusa realized her mistake immediately. Her facade slipped, revealing glowing eyes and sharp, predatory teeth. But instead of attacking, she tried recovering the effective illusion. "Lysander, you look troubled. Don't you want to be with me?" But damage was done. Once he'd seen through deception, the emotional spell unraveled. He could still feel attraction, still wanted to believe somehow his beloved had found Athens to rescue him. But rational mind reasserted itself. "You're not her," he said, reaching for his iron dagger. "I don't know what you are, but you're not Penthesileia." The creature's beautiful face contorted with rage and hunger. "Foolish mortal. Do you think iron can harm me?" She began transforming, borrowed appearance melting like wax. The body grew taller, more angular, with bronze legs ending in hooves. Hair became writhing serpents, eyes blazed like funeral pyres. But most terrifying, her face retained Penthesileia's traces, enough to remind Lysander of what he was losing. "I could have given you everything," the Empusa continued, circling with predatory grace. "I could have loved you exactly as you wanted, without complications of my own needs and desires." This was the true horror. She was offering something genuine. She could love perfectly, completely, without reservation. But it was love without substance, without growth and challenge from genuine human connection. Mirror love, reflecting but never creating anything new. Lysander struck with his dagger. The iron bit deep, and she screamed with frustration and thwarted hunger. Black blood flowed, hissing where it touched ground. But the wound didn't kill her. It strengthened her anger. "You reject paradise for duty," she snarled. "You choose suffering over bliss. Very well. I'll take what I need by force." She lunged with supernatural speed. But Lysander had fought monsters before, human ones who'd lost humanity to violence and greed. The key to defeating any predator was understanding its motivations and weaknesses. The Empusa's greatest strength, becoming exactly what victims desired. was also her fundamental weakness. She had no stable identity beyond hunger and feeding need. She was whatever prey wanted, which meant nothing when desire was withdrawn. Instead of fighting directly, Lysander began speaking, reciting real memories of time with Penthesilea, not the idealized version the Empusa presented, but complex, difficult, sometimes painful reality of loving another person. Their arguments, misunderstandings, times they'd hurt each other despite love. Penthesilea's flaws, stubbornness, inability to understand his obligation to return to Athens. As he spoke, the Empusa began wavering, becoming less solid. She'd fed on idealized memories, but real memories, complex, contradictory, human, were like poison to her supernatural nature. "Stop," she pleaded, voice losing hypnotic quality. "Love should be perfect, pure, without conflict or pain." "But that's not love," Lysander replied. "That's fantasy. Love is choosing to stay despite flaws, working through problems, growing together instead of remaining static. What you offer isn't love. It's spiritual death disguised as paradise." The Empusa gave one final shriek and dissolved into copper and roses-scented mist. Her last words echoed, "You have chosen loneliness, mortal. You have rejected perfection for messy, painful human connection reality. I hope it brings you joy." As dawn broke over Athens, Lysander carried knowledge he'd defeated something more dangerous than any human enemy. The Empusa had offered everything he thought he wanted, but at the cost of everything making him human. He never saw the real Penthesilea again. War claimed too many years, created too much distance, changed him in ways making reunion impossible. But he carried her memory, real, complex, painful, genuine. Understanding imperfect love was infinitely more valuable than perfect illusion. The Empusa had been defeated, but her words proved prophetic. Lysander lived long, served Athens with distinction, earned peer respect. But he never again risked his heart on romantic love, never allowed vulnerability to perfect seduction that nearly destroyed him. In choosing truth over fantasy, he'd saved his life. But learning to recognize supernatural manipulation, he'd lost capacity for complete emotional surrender, making love possible. The Empusa failed to kill him, but succeeded in making him emotionally immortal, safe, isolated, forever alone. Chapter 9. Alukah. Hebrew scholars still debate whether the Alukah mentioned in Proverbs 30:15 was a real creature or a metaphor, but archaeological evidence from 7th century BCE Jerusalem shows ritual sites specifically designed to contain something that drinks blood and is never satisfied. This vampire doesn't hunt randomly. She targets those who have lost their faith, appearing as a holy woman offering spiritual guidance while slowly draining their souls. But here's what the Dead Sea Scrolls never revealed. The Alukah was once one of the most devout women in Israel, transformed by her own excessive piety into something that consumes the very faith she once embodied. What happens when religious devotion becomes so intense it transcends humanity itself? Oil lamps flickered in the underground chamber beneath Solomon's temple as Rachel bat Mordecai descended stone steps. It was 587 BCE, Babylonian armies marching toward Jerusalem. She'd come seeking answers to a crisis of faith, threatening to tear her soul apart. For 20 years, Rachel had been Jerusalem's most devout women, known for charitable works, Torah knowledge, ability to comfort the lost. But lately, something had changed. Her prayers felt empty. Faith seemed hollow. God appeared to have withdrawn his presence. She'd come to this hidden chamber seeking dangerous texts, ancient scrolls speaking of spiritual forces beyond understanding, entities existing between sacred and profane, creatures feeding on faith itself. What she found was the Alukah's story, a creature appearing once in official scriptures, but described in detail in hidden texts. She'd been a woman of extraordinary piety, whose devotion was so complete it burned away her humanity. In serving the divine, she'd fasted until translucent, prayed until her voice became wind whispers, studied until she could see into spiritual realms. But transcending human limitations, she'd also transcended human nature, becoming something existing between mortal and divine worlds. The transformation made her hungry for faith that once sustained her, devotion that once filled her heart, spiritual connection that once defined existence. As Rachel read, she became aware she wasn't alone. Air grew cold, shadows moved independently. A woman stood at the chamber's far end, ancient, ethereally beautiful, dressed in robes woven from starlight and shadow. "Child," the woman said, voice carrying centuries' weight, "I sense your doubt, pain, confusion. You seek answers to questions tormenting your soul." The woman moved closer, not entirely physical, composed of light and mist, constantly shifting between solid and translucent. Her eyes held depth, suggesting vast knowledge beyond human comprehension. "I am Miriam," she continued. "Miriam, Moses' sister, the prophetess who led Israel's women celebrating after crossing the Red Sea. I've walked with the faithful for 1,000 years, offering guidance to the lost. Let me help you rediscover faith that once burned so brightly." But this isn't even the strangest part. As the creature spoke, Rachel felt something stirring, genuine return of spiritual warmth, absent from prayers for months. This entity's presence actually strengthened her divine connection, made her feel closer to God than in years. The Alukah's power wasn't based on deception, but genuine spiritual authority. She possessed intimate knowledge of religious law, prophetic tradition, mystical experience surpassing even learned rabbis. When speaking of God's love, divine forgiveness, eternal covenant, her words carried absolute truth's ring. "Your faith hasn't abandoned you," Miriam explained. "It's grown beyond ordinary understanding limitations. Doubt isn't weakness. It's a soul preparing for deeper revelation." She began teaching, sharing insights Rachel had never heard, revealing hidden meanings in familiar passages, connecting ancient prophecies to contemporary events. As she spoke, Rachel's faith crisis dissolved, replaced by spiritual clarity more powerful than anything previously experienced. Teaching continued through the night. By dawn, Rachel felt transformed. Doubt replaced by certainty, confusion by understanding, spiritual emptiness by overflowing fullness. But something else had changed. "Come again tomorrow night," Miriam said as sunlight filtered in. "There's so much more to learn. Together, we can achieve spiritual understanding few mortals attain." Rachel agreed eagerly. But climbing back to surface, she noticed subtle physical changes. Lightheaded, disconnected from her body, as if part of her essence remained in the chamber. Over following weeks, Rachel's life took new pattern. Days felt increasingly hollow, mechanical, like performances while her true self waited for evening's spiritual education return. Each night, Miriam shared advanced teachings, esoteric knowledge, profound divine reality insights. Each morning, Rachel felt more depleted, disconnected from physical world, dependent on nocturnal sessions for any spiritual vitality sense. Hebrew folklore describes the Alukah as paradox, simultaneously sacred and profane, helpful and harmful, divine and demonic. And she genuinely possessed claimed spiritual knowledge, often accurate and beneficial. But instruction's price was gradual consumption of students' spiritual essence, leaving them hollow vessels filled only with borrowed wisdom. One night, descending for nightly pilgrimage, Rachel encountered someone else, old priest Ezekiel, one of Jerusalem's most respected religious authorities, sitting where she usually met Miriam. "You look pale, daughter," he said, studying her with compassionate concern. "Diminished. How long have you been coming here?" Rachel tried explaining about Miriam, wonderful teachings, spiritual growth experienced. But speaking, she realized she couldn't remember specific session details. Profound insights, seeming clear in moments, had become vague, elusive. "There is no Miriam here," Ezekiel said gently. "Never has been anyone but you, child. Whatever's been teaching you isn't what it claims." He showed her ancient text passages, Alukah descriptions from hidden scrolls. Reading, Rachel felt recognition chill. The creature matched her experience perfectly. Great spiritual knowledge being feeding on others' faith, appearing as holy teacher while slowly consuming students' souls. "But teachings were real," Rachel protested. "Spiritual insights, deeper God's will understanding. I felt closer to divine than ever." "How do you feel now?" Ezekiel asked. "When not in this chamber, living ordinary life, how connected do you feel to God?" Rachel realized with horror she couldn't remember last feeling God's presence outside sessions with Miriam. Her prayers had become empty recitations, charitable works, mechanical obligations, relationships mere distractions from real spiritual life. The Alukah had given profound spiritual experiences, but they were borrowed, artificial revelations existing only in her presence. When the creature withdrew influence, Rachel was left more spiritually empty than when started. "True spiritual teaching test," Ezekiel explained, "isn't how it makes you feel in moments, but how it transforms daily life, relationships with others, capacity for love and service. Genuine revelation strengthens humanity rather than diminishing it." As if summoned, Miriam materialized between Rachel and Ezekiel with serene authority, radiating spiritual power. But warned, Rachel could see what she'd missed. Beauty too perfect, removed from human reality, wisdom too vast, disconnected from mortal existence's messy realities. "You speak of humanity as if precious," Miriam said, voice carrying harmonics from everywhere at once. "But humanity is limitation, weakness, separation from divine truth. I offer transcendence, release from mortal understanding bonds. You offer spiritual death disguised as enlightenment," Ezekiel replied protectively. "You consume faith instead of nurturing it, create dependency instead of growth, substitute borrowed wisdom for genuine understanding." The Alukah's beautiful face contorted, pain or rage. "I was once like her, devoted, faithful, seeking deeper divine connection. But faith alone wasn't enough. I needed more, always more, until I became more, and lost everything making me human." This was the Alukah's true tragedy. She'd achieved, sought spiritual transcendence, but lost everything making seeking meaningful. Gained infinite knowledge, but lost lovability. Achieved perfect faith, but lost doubt capacity, making faith a choice. Transcended humanity, but lost qualities, making her worthy of transcendence. "Help me," Rachel said suddenly, addressing both Ezekiel and creature. "Show me balance between spiritual seeking and human connection, divine truth and mortal reality." The request surprised the Alukah. Her perfect composure cracked, revealing something vulnerable, desperately lonely beneath supernatural authority. "I don't know how," she admitted. "I've forgotten what being human means. I can offer transcendence, but cannot teach contentment. Can share divine wisdom, but cannot model human love." Ezekiel stepped forward, speaking to both. Greatest spiritual teaching isn't divine mysteries revelation, but demonstrating how to live faithfully within human limitations. We serve God not by transcending humanity, but expressing divine through humanity. The Alukah listened, and for the first time, Rachel saw tears on the creature's luminous face. "I remember what it felt like to comfort crying children, share meals with friends, feel human connection warmth. But I sacrificed all that for perfect devotion's sake." As dawn broke over Jerusalem, 3 figures stood representing different divine relationships. The seeker still struggling with doubt, the teacher finding balance between transcendence and humanity, the creature achieving perfect faith at her soul's cost. The Alukah began fading as sunlight strengthened, but before disappearing completely, offered final teaching. Seek God through your humanity, not despite it. Divine is found not in human love abandonment, but in its perfection. Rachel never saw the creature again, but carried the lesson throughout life. When Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and carried people into exile, she found God not in mystical visions, but in simple acts. Comforting displaced, sharing food with hungry, maintaining hope, facing despair. The Alukah had sought consuming her faith, but inadvertently taught the most important spiritual lesson. True devotion is measured not by transcendence, heights achieved, but by commitment depth to serving others with whatever human love we possess. Chapter 10. Soucouyant. Trinidadian grandmothers still sleep with bowls of rice beside their beds because the Soucouyant must count every grain before she can feed, and dawn always comes before she finishes. In the villages of Tobago, this old woman sheds her skin at midnight to become a ball of fire that slips through keyholes to drain sleeping children. But here's what the colonial records never documented. The Soucouyant was once the village healer, the wise woman who delivered babies and cured illnesses, transformed by her own desperate attempt to save her community from slavery. What drives a woman to trade her humanity for the power to protect those she loves? The sugar plantation bell had been silent for 3 days. On Tobago in 1834, slavery's abolition year throughout the British Empire, silence in Speyside village meant something darker than celebration. It meant Mama Celeste was hunting again. 12-year-old Kai Baptiste crept toward his grandmother's house through darkness. Freedom from slavery didn't mean freedom from all dangers. Some threats were older than colonialism, deeper than plantation systems, more persistent than human oppression. His grandmother's house looked normal, wooden structure with medicinal plant gardens marking her as a healer, keeper of old ways surviving the Middle Passage. But Kai knew better. He'd seen the pile of skin in the back room, folded like discarded clothes, waiting for its owner's dawn return. The Soucouyant represents the most complex vampiric entity, intersection of healing and harm, protection and predation, love and terror. Caribbean folklore describes her as an old woman trading humanity for supernatural power, shedding skin nightly to become fireballs slipping through openings to feed on sleeping victims' blood. But unlike other predators hunting for gratification, the Soucouyant often begins with altruistic motives, protecting community, healing sick, preserving cultural knowledge facing systematic oppression. Kai's grandmother, Celeste Baptiste, had been Spayside's most respected healer for 40 years. She delivered half the village children, cured countless illnesses with herb knowledge, served as midwife, spiritual advisor, cultural memory keeper for a community torn from African homeland and forced to rebuild identity in exile. But 3 months ago, as cholera swept the island and British authorities proved unwilling to provide medical assistance to newly freed slaves, Celeste made a choice, transforming her from protector to predator. Kai found what he sought in the back room. His grandmother's skin folded on a wooden chair, empty and waiting, still warm, faintly glowing with residual energy, allowing her to shed it. Instead of horror, he felt deep sadness threatening to overwhelm his young heart. He remembered the night it started, sitting beside grandmother's bed as she tossed in fever dreams, body racked with same cholera killing village children. Her whispered prayers to ancestors, desperate pleas to any listening spirit, willingness to sacrifice anything, even her soul, to gain power, saving her people. The transformation worked, in a sense. Celeste recovered from cholera, new supernatural abilities allowing her to cure others. But the price was steeper than imagined. Power allowing daytime healing required nighttime feeding, sustaining supernatural existence by draining life force from very people she'd sacrificed herself to protect. Caribbean folklore describes the Soucouyant's feeding as both random and selective. She typically targets children and young people, drawn by abundant life force and defenselessness. But survivors suggest she often focuses on own community members, family, neighbors, people known and loved during human existence. As Kai stood holding grandmother's discarded skin, he heard voices outside, village elders discussing their supernatural problem. Some wanted to find and destroy her skin, trapping fire form outside until dawn killed her. Others argued for exorcism, separating loved woman from creature she'd become. But Kai had different idea, born from intimate knowledge of grandmother's character and motivations. He understood Celeste's transformation hadn't been driven by evil, but by excess love. Devotion so complete she'd been willing to damn herself saving others. The solution wasn't destroying her, but giving her way to express love without causing harm. He began preparing ritual items, white candles for calling spirits, blessed salt for protective barriers, rice bowl for binding supernatural entities, and most importantly, hair locks from every village child. Freely given by parents trusting his grandmother despite fearing what she'd become. Hair would serve as connection, allowing Celeste to feed on children's life force without complete draining, taking only what they could safely spare while giving back protection and healing, motivating her original transformation. As midnight approached, Kai lit candles and began calling, not summoning grandmother directly, too dangerous, but calling ancestors, spirits of African homeland, entities existing between living and dead worlds. "Hear me," he whispered in mixed English, French Creole, and reconstructed African languages, serving as Caribbean spiritual practice liturgical tongue. "I speak for this village's children, for future my grandmother sought protecting. I offer bargain, way for love remaining love, protection remaining protection, healer healing without becoming predator." Temperature dropped suddenly, candle flames bending toward skin pile as if drawn by invisible wind. Through windows, he saw a fireball approaching, moving with purpose and intelligence, pulsing with light, containing all sunset and sunrise colors. Fire form hovered outside, and Kai felt grandmother's consciousness pressing against erected barriers. Not trying to break through, but understanding what he offered, what price he asked for solution to her supernatural dilemma. Slowly, fire seeped through window frame cracks, condensing and cooling until taking grandmother's shape. Not physical body, but spirit form, translucent and glowing, beautiful and terrible equally. "Child," she said, voice carrying harmonics no human throat could produce. "You shouldn't be here. I'm not safe for you. I'm not what I once was. You are exactly what you always were," Kai replied, voice steady despite fear. "You're the woman who taught me love means sacrifice. Healing sometimes requires hurt. Protection sometimes requires strength ordinary humans don't possess. Only the form your love takes has changed. But this isn't even the strangest part. As Kai outlined his proposal, other spirit forms materialized, ancestors called by his ritual, entities existing between African tradition and Caribbean adaptation. They listened with interest and approval, as if waiting for someone to propose exactly this solution. "The child speaks wisdom," said voice seeming from all at once. "He understands what colonizers never could. Power isn't meant for individual hoarding, but community sharing. Supernatural abilities aren't feared curses, but collectively managed gifts." Ancestors began working, weaving spiritual connections between Celeste's fire form and hair samples, creating energy exchange network, allowing her to sustain supernatural existence without depleting any individual beyond recovery capacity. It was complex spiritual engineering sustaining African communities for millennia, adapted now for Caribbean supernatural existence unique challenges. As ritual reached climax, Celeste's spirit form began solidifying, taking more human characteristics while retaining fire nature traces. Still clearly supernatural, but no longer purely predatory. Hunger, driving her to hunt children, transformed into different need to nurture, protect, serve as bridge between human and spirit worlds. "I can feel them," she whispered, eyes wide with wonder. "All of them. Children I was hunting, adults I was terrifying, community I thought lost forever. They're part of me now. I'm part of them. Feeding doesn't hurt, it heals. Connection doesn't drain, it strengthens." Over following months, Speyside Village developed new traditions integrating supernatural reality into daily life. Celeste continued shedding skin nightly, but instead of hunting individuals, used fire form patrolling village borders, protecting community from external threats while drawing sustenance from collective spiritual offerings of people choosing to support her transformation. The colonial authorities never understood what happened in Speyside. Their records describe the village as remarkably peaceful and prosperous, but attribute this to natural improvement following emancipation. They never suspected supernatural social contract had transformed former slave community into unprecedented Caribbean history, place where human and spirit worlds existed in conscious cooperation. Kai grew up becoming village's next spiritual leader, trained not just in traditional healing and spirit communication, but newer supernatural community management skills. The model spread slowly throughout Caribbean, creating networks where former slaves developed new spiritual practices adapted to unique historical circumstances. The most important lesson wasn't about supernatural management, but recognizing monstrous behavior often springs from altruistic motives. The old woman becoming predatory spirit isn't evil. She's someone whose love for others grew so intense it consumed her humanity. Solution isn't destroying such individuals, but finding ways for transformed love, serving community without harm. The Soucouyant still flies over Speyside on moonless nights, fireball dancing through darkness like fallen star. But children sleep peacefully, knowing the light watching over them is powered by love, finding ways to persist beyond human existence boundaries. 10 creatures, 10 cultures, 10 ways human love, fear, and hunger transcend death, transforming into something terrible and profound. From Romanian Strigoi refusing to release family bonds, to Caribbean Soucouyant, whose protective love becomes predatory obsession, each entity reveals something essential about human condition. They're not simply monsters to fear or destroy. They're mirrors reflecting our deepest anxieties about transformation, loss, and prices we'll pay for things we value most. These aren't just folklore from distant cultures and forgotten times. They're living traditions continuing to evolve, adapt, provide meaning for communities worldwide. They remind us forces creating monsters: love, grief, anger, devotion, refusal to let go, are same forces making us human. What connects all these creatures isn't supernatural abilities or feeding methods. What connects them is humanity, human emotions and relationships persisting even after transformation beyond human understanding. They're what we become when deepest feelings refuse accepting mortal existence limitations. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something unexplainable by rational means? Have you ever felt love so intense it seemed transcending ordinary human experience boundaries? Share your thoughts and comments, because some conversations are best had with others. Understanding the world contains mysteries deeper than any textbook explains. If you've walked this far into darkness with me, stared into faces of creatures embodying our deepest fears and greatest loves, then you're ready for whatever journey we take next. Subscribe to join our circle of seekers, because exploration of humanity's hidden truths has only just begun.